Okay, so AI is going to be taking notes for us in case we need that. All right. So where are we up to? We are now in chapter 34. We're in the middle of chapter 34. Chapter 34, just as a recap, it really concludes the set of chapters that are dealing with joy and sadness and emotion. There's a whole section of 9 chapters, I believe, that have just been tackling the how do I stay positive in the service of God? Because Tanya made a clear statement that, even if you know all the right things to do and not to do and how to do them, if you can't get yourself into it, if you can't get yourself happy and joyous, then it's very hard. It's very hard to succeed. It's almost impossible to succeed. And so we had a whole series of chapters, well, what if I'm feeling guilty? And what if I'm feeling shame? And what if I'm feeling this? And what if I'm feeling that? And what if I'm feeling numb? All these different chapters. And these last 2 chapters, 33 and 34, aren't tackling any particular issue that might be making us feel down, but they're focused on the how do I just be in a positive, good mood? I wake up in the morning and I can't pinpoint to anything that's bothering me. It's not like, God forbid, there's a tragedy or there's something that's weighing on me, but I don't know, I'm not inspired. Can't get into it. How do I create a feeling of real joy? Um, and real strong emotion. And it's interesting because I was thinking about this, that it's interesting that Judaism, the way the Tanya describes it, requires us to really have this very romantic relationship with God. I mean, the Tanya is telling us if you want to have a real meaningful Judaism, you really need to be in love with God. And so much of the Tanya is focused on how do I fall in love with God? How do I nurture this love? How do I feel God's presence in my life? Because the Tanya really places a huge emphasis on if you can tap into this love, if you can connect, if you can feel the romance, your relationship will be on a whole different level. And that's why the Tanya dedicates so many chapters to it. So when we began this chapter, chapter 34, the Tanya began by telling us about previous generations who had a very, very unique connection to God. We said that the matriarchs and the patriarchs, they had this incredible connection called the chariot connection, the Merkava. They were like a chariot, the way the chariot is to a horse, or the way the car, the back seat is to the engine of the car. They basically had no will of their own. Everything they did was just they were completely connected and subservient to God. We saw this later with the prophets, as in, specifically Moses, but other prophets as well. When a prophet received prophecy, it was like they didn't exist. Not Moses, but other prophets. There's description of them receiving prophecy as they would like fall down to the ground and like their body would shake. It was like they had this like out of body experience where they didn't exist. It wasn't, I am the prophet and I am now receiving prophecy. There was no I. They were like totally nullified to God. And so too, the Tanya told us about Moshe. We said that the Shekhinah spoke from the throat of Moshe. It literally spoke out of his vocal cords, meaning when Moshe was communicating with God, he was completely, the Hasidic word is batel. He was like non-existent, so to speak, completely a channel to godliness. Then the Jewish people as a whole had this experience at Mount Sinai when we heard God's voice and we got this like tremendous revelation. We couldn't handle it. It was overwhelming. It was like we can't do this. Like we can't do this, being a total channel to God in this way. And so after the receiving of the Torah, the first thing that God told the Jewish people is, all right, build me a sanctuary, build me a space where you can have this experience of godliness in this world in a way that you could have it, in a way that you could handle it. You know, we often hear talk about, we're waiting for Mashiach to come, we're waiting for the final redemption. And one of the things that's typically quoted as in the final redemption, what's going to be so great about the final redemption? Yes, we say there'll be no more war and there'll be peace and there'll be no more sickness. But one of the things that is mentioned numerous times is we're going to have the third temple. if you think about it for a minute, you may have wondered this, like, why are we all going so crazy for a temple? Like, what's going to be so great about this temple that I don't have in my life right now? I get it. I want no more sickness and no more war and no more death, but a temple? For what? To bring animal sacrifices? Like so that we can go back 2000 years to how people used to live? Why is having a temple so essential to Jewish life and something that Jews yearn for and pray for and cry for throughout the generations? Um, One example that I heard that I felt was really explained it well is you could think of the temple like an embassy. You know, if we are in the US and you walk into an embassy of another country in the US, you walk into the Israeli embassy building in the US, you're technically in Israeli territory, right? I believe that Jonathan Pollard, when he was convicted as a spy, spying for Israel, the first place he went to seek shelter was in the Israeli embassy. Why? Even though he was on US ground, because when you're in the embassy of another country, you're in this country, but you're not really in this country. You're under the jurisdiction, you're connecting to a different country and the laws are different for you. Similarly, hi Trisha, the temple in this world was basically like an embassy of godliness in this world. So while the Tanya has told us so many times that this world is there's so much falsehood, there's so much hiddenness. We don't see the true reality, that we don't see the real godliness in everything. I look around and it looks like money is important and fame is important and jobs are important and it's hard in my day to day to see the truth for what it really is. Being able to step into the temple is like stepping into the embassy of God, stepping into a place where the only truth that exists is the godly truth. And being able to connect to that essential, deepest truth, that was the experience of the temple. So it wasn't about necessarily the sacrifices or what they did or what they didn't do or how beautiful the structure was. It was the ability that Jews had to step into a space that was a direct channel to godliness. You know, there's a beautiful story that the first time I heard it, I read it as like a fable, but I actually looked it up, and it's a true story that happened in the time of the Arizal in Tzfat. They tell a story. There was a great rabbi in Tzfat who was giving a speech to his congregation. This in the times of the Arizals, I would say, um, about 1,000 years ago. I'm not so good with the history and the numbers, but something to that effect. Anyway, the rabbi was giving a speech in his shul, and he was telling the people how much God yearns for the temple. Not just us as Jewish people yearn to have the future redemption in the temple, but God misses the temple. He misses having a place where the Jewish people come and they gather and they bring sacrifices and they bring the incense and they bring the showbread every week. It's difficult for God when the Jewish people are in exile. So listening in the crowd was a very simple Jew, like a really simple Jew who just wanted to do the right thing. And he hears the rabbi talking about this and he's thinking, wow, God is so sad that there's no temple. Well, I can't build a temple for God. I can't bring the incense or even sacrifices. But the rabbi also mentioned the showbread. I'm pretty sure my wife and I can arrange some showbread for God and bring God a little bit of happiness that he can have even while the Jews are in exile. So he went home and he called his wife and he said, "Listen, Zelda, we have an opportunity to bring real happiness to God. Let's make showbread for God." And they went and they got the finest flour and they sifted the flour, multiple times. And they, were very careful with their ingredients and measuring their ingredients and made their finest challah recipe and braided the most beautiful challah braid that they could, maybe a 6 braid challah. And early in the morning, this man, let's call him Yankel, just because I don't have a name for him. Yankel goes to immerse in the mikveh and prepare for this very holy deed that he's going to do of giving showbread to God. And he takes the beautiful challah that he prepared with his wife. He wraps it up. He goes to the synagogue. There's no one there, obviously, early in the morning on Friday morning. He comes in, and how's he going to bring this to God? Okay, I'll put it in the ark. He goes in, he opens the ark where the Torah scrolls are. He puts the challah down, and he says, God, you don't have to be sad anymore. My wife and I have prepared showbread for you. And he closes the ark, and he goes home. He's very happy. He's feeling very good. Later in the day, the gabbai of the shul, who is responsible for cleaning up and organizing the shul before Shabbat, comes in and he's sweeping and he's cleaning, he's putting books away, and he smells a really good smell in the shul. He's like, what is the smell? Where is this coming from? Now, this guy was also a pretty simple guy. He did not have a lot of money, and he, especially on Friday afternoon, he always felt the pressure, like, Shabbat is coming and I don't have so much to bring to my family. I wish I had something special to make Shabbat really special for us. And he smells and he smells and he smells something, and he follows his nose and it leads him straight to the ark, and he opens up the ark a tiny bit, and oh my goodness, there's this big, beautiful challah. God must have seen my pain and he's sending me a gift. And he takes out the challah, and it smells so good and it looks so beautiful. And he's so happy. He puts it in a bag. He brings it home. He's like, guys, God loves us. He sent us a challah for Shabbos. That night, Shabbat started, and after services, Yankel is curious whatever happened with his challah. And so he comes to the front of the shul. He just kind of pretends that he's, maybe, kissing the ark or something, takes a little peek inside, sees that his challah is gone, and he says, wow, God accepted it. An arm must have come down from heaven, took the challah, and he's in heaven. He literally runs home, can't even walk home. This went on for many weeks. Every week, the same thing. Early in the morning, Yankel will put the challah down. A few hours later, the gabbai would come and collect the challah. This one thought he was giving gifts to God. This one thought God was giving him gifts. And they were both so happy. A few weeks later, one Friday, the rabbi of the shul was in shul on a Friday. I don't know, maybe it was a chaotic Friday at home. He had to sit and prepare for his speeches and whatever for Shabbos, and he decided that he's going to do it in the synagogue because it's a nice, quiet space. And when Yankel's walking into shul with his challah, maybe he came a little later, maybe he wasn't as careful because he kind of got used to doing this every week. He comes in with his challah and he opens up the ark, and suddenly the rabbi jumps up and's like, excuse me, why are you opening up the ark with this big challah in your hands? And, a short time later, the gabbai walks in, and the gabbai comes, and he goes over to the ark, and before you know it, they talk about it, and they realize what exactly had been going on here. And the rabbi gives it to both of them over the head. He yells at them. He's like, what is this? What do you think this is? A mockery and a joke? You think you're giving bread to God? You think God needs this challah that you put into the ark? And you think God sends you bread? It doesn't work that way. You can imagine both of these men left very, very disappointed. The fascinating thing is that night, the Arizal, who was a tremendous sage and Kabbalist who lived in Tzfat at the time, he sent a message to the rabbi of the shul. The Arizal, with his tremendous vision, was aware of what happened in the shul. He sent a message to the rabbi of the shul, and he said, I want you to know that these are very harsh words, but you will not make it through this year, meaning you will not live to see next year. You should know that since the destruction of the temple, God has not had such tremendous nachas as he had from these interactions of these two men. And that was the message that the Arizal sent to him. And if you think about it for a minute, yes, it's such a cute, heartwarming story, but what was the Arizal saying? Why such a tremendous joy that God got from these interactions? If you think about it, it seems like what these two men were connecting to was the essence of what the temple was. That connection to the true reality, meaning knowing that everything I get is from God. So I know it in my head. I don't necessarily feel it always in my day-to-day because, I know that I have to work hard and I have to get the job and I have to get the paycheck. And somewhere I know that really it's all coming from God. But to really feel it with every fiber of my being, that when I see the challah, I really feel like The boss didn't give it to me. No one God sent me this challah. That's connecting to the real truth. And so too with, Yankel and his wife who were giving this to God. It wasn't about like, oh yeah, it's not a show. It's not something I have to do because it's the right thing. I'm literally giving a gift to God. And it seems like this real, connection to essence and to truth and to depth, that's what the Arizal was, hinting at, that in the times of the temple, God had that. He had people interacting with him, so to speak, on this very, very deep, very essential level. And since the destruction of the temple, it doesn't happen most of the time. So back to, what we were saying, the Tanya is telling us that during temple times, which was approximately 1,000 years of Jewish history. We had the first there was the tabernacle for a few hundred years. We had a tabernacle, we had it in the desert, then we had it in Shiloh for over 300 years. And then the first temple lasted for 410 years and the second temple for 420 years. So overall, it was really over 1,000 years that Jews had a temple in their life and had this way of connecting to God. And the Tanya says, so what happens now? How do I connect to that essence of God? If I don't have a temple to walk into, how do I connect to God in this way? And the Tanya says, since we don't have a temple, so there's one thing that Tanya doesn't mention it here, mentions in other chapters, that there is this idea of connecting to very righteous people, right? Just like the matriarchs and the patriarchs and the prophets, they had this incredible, essential connection to God. When a Jewish person is able to spend time in the presence of a very righteous and holy person, or you're able to go to the grave of a holy and righteous person, and we go to pray at the graves of the patriarchs and the matriarchs in Hebron. We pray at the graves of, tremendous people, and a little bit, we're able to connect to something otherworldly while we're there. But beyond that, the Tanya says, what do we do now? We have to figure out, how do we touch God's essence in this world? And what we mentioned last time is Tanya says this is in halacha, in Torah study. When I study Torah, I am able to touch God in the same way as Jews touched God when they walked into the temple. I may not feel it in the same way. I need to understand it in order to feel it because I don't have that sensory experience of, walking into the temple. But in essence, what I'm doing is the same thing. And we explained that. Why is that? We spoke about will, inner will and outer will, right? We all have things that we want. And for a lot of things that we want, if I ask you, well, why do you want that? There's usually a reason of why you want it. Why do you want to go to work? Just because you love going to work? No, I want to go to work because I want to get the paycheck. Oh, why do you want the paycheck? Because you love money? Not necessarily. I want the paycheck because I want to be able to live. Why do you want to be able to live? Because I want to be able to, spend meaningful time with my family. And why do you want to do that? Well, because what's life about? I mean, that's just what I want. Now you hit the point where you don't really have a reason for the want. That's already inner will. Everything else until now was will, it was desire, but it was more external desire because it was a desire to fulfill another desire, to fulfill another desire. When I get to the space of, because that's what I want, now I touched my innermost desire, right? We gave the example of, why do you set your alarms for 6 a.m.? Because I want to wake up early. You want to wake up early? Why is that? Well, I don't really want to wake up early, but I want to be able to make lunch for my kids. Well, why do you want to be able to make lunch for your kids? Because I want my kids to be satisfied and not to go hungry in school. Why do you want your kids not to go hungry in school? Because I love my kids and I want them to have a great school experience. Why do you want that for your kids? Just because I love my kids. Okay, then, or maybe you might say, well, because God gave me these kids and it's my job to care for them. Why is it your job to care for them? Then I already hit the end. That's already my internal will. My internal will is that I want to take care of these kids. So just like we all have, and we could do this with anything we want. I want that piece of cake. Why do I want that piece of cake? Because it's going to make me feel really good. Why do you want to feel really good? Because I'm having a bad day and I don't want to have a bad day. Well, why don't you want to have a bad day? Like we can do that with anything. And when you ask yourself enough whys, you're going to get to the point where, oh, that's already my inner will because I don't have another why for that one. Similarly, the same as with God. Why does this world exist? Because God wanted it to exist. Why did God want this world to exist? Well, we could look at the different things within this world. Why did God want cows to exist? I think this is the example we gave last time. Well, God says, I want you to be able to use these cows for good things. I want you to be able to use the cows to make food that's going to make your Shabbat tables beautiful, that's going to be allow you to celebrate my holidays. I want you to be able to use the skin of these cows to make parchment so that you can write Torah scrolls. Well, God, why do you want us to have Torah scrolls, or why do you want us to have mezuzahs? Because I want you to hang a mezuzah on your door, thus fulfilling my commandment of having a mezuzah on your doorpost. Well, why, God? Why do you want that? Because that's what I want you to do. I want my Jewish people to fulfill these mitzvahs in this world. All right, God, I got to your inner will on this one. God, why did you create, this? Why did you create evil in this world? Because you want evil? No, I created evil in the world because I want people to be able to choose to do the right thing. And the only way they can choose to do the right thing is if they have a choice of good and evil. Otherwise, it isn't real choice. Well, why do you want them to choose to do good? Because I want them to, fulfill the commandments. Why do you want them to do that? Well, because that's what I want. So ultimately, God has also everything in the world is God's will, an expression of his will, but there's external will and there's internal will. And in order for us to connect to his internal will, we need like that manual that tells us, all right, what does God truly want? If I know what God truly wants, then I'm able to connect to his internal will and to connect to his essence the way I would have connected when I walked into the temple. And that, the Tanya tells us, I achieve through Torah study. Because when I study Torah, Torah is God's will. It's where God spells out, this is what I want in this world. This is why I made a world. This is what I want you to engage in. And every time I study Torah, yes, it's inspiring, and yes, it's beautiful, and sometimes it's not so inspiring, and sometimes it's, doesn't necessarily talk to me. But when I spend time studying Torah, and I'm aware that this is God's will, I am able to, that is a very deep, essential connection that I can achieve with God that would be equivalent to, in temple times, me walking into the temple. I think we said last time, it's like giving God a hug. I want to really connect to God in a deep way. Study his Torah. And that's, I think, where we left off last time. The Tanya said, a great way to connect to God is find time in your day to study Torah. Now, ideally, I'd love to be able to study Torah all the time, 24 hours a day. But it's not realistic because I have a life and I have to work and I have to take care of my family. So set specific times in your life to study Torah. The halakha tells us that at minimum, we need to set aside ideally 2 times a day, every morning and every evening, some time to study. And if I can't even do that, then at least once a day. Then I know that I have a set time in my schedule that I spend time studying Torah. And someone asked me after last class, studying Torah, does that mean that I need to study the Parsha? Does that mean that is there any part of Torah? Study Torah. Either open a book, listen to a podcast, read what maybe it's a very deep textual, technical book. Maybe it's a book with short Torah insights. Maybe it's, little video YouTube clips of somebody who shares Torah thoughts, but make consistent time in your day to study Torah. Every time you do that, it's like you took a trip to the temple. As brief as it is, it's you connecting to God. And that's, I think, where we left off last time. The Tanya in chapter 34 gives us one more thing. It says, I'm going to give you the author of the Tanya says, I'm going to give you 2 touch points, 2 ways that you can touch God in your everyday life as if you were walking into the temple. One of them is Torah study. When you study Torah, as irrelevant, even if it's irrelevant, it's beautiful when it's inspiring, but even if it feels irrelevant and it feels uninspiring, you know that you're touching godliness during that time. And then there's another one. This other one, the Tanya says, is actually interesting. In some ways, it supersedes the Torah study one. Because Torah study, if let's say I make time every day, even twice a day, every morning and every evening, I sit down to study Torah. So it's like I gave God a hug in the morning, gave God a hug in the afternoon. But what about the rest of my day? I'm at work. I'm taking care of business. So am I basically just like, hugging him twice a day and then the rest of the day I'm doing other things? Is there a way that I can be hugging him all the time, all day long, even if I'm not sitting in the synagogue or studying Torah all day long? Tanya says yes. And you know what that is? That is through the mitzvah of charity. Because when I invest my day's work into working and earning a living, and then I come home with my paycheck and I say, I earned this and this amount, and I am now going to take the Torah required percentage off of my paycheck and give it to charity. So the minimum, halacha tells us that at minimum, every person needs to give 10% of their earnings to charity. The Tanya quotes it here, and the Code of Jewish Law says that the ideal, like the most beautiful way to do charity is to try to give 20%. At minimum, we give 10. Even more beautiful is to give 20, but it kind of caps it at 20%. A person is not necessarily encouraged to give more than 20%, unless, of course, they have the ability to do so comfortably. And the idea is really to protect people, to give people the, not feeling guilty for keeping 80% of your earnings to actually support your family and take care. But of course, if somebody is earning more than enough and they're able to comfortably give more, there's no real limit to how much charity you can give. But when I take my earnings and I remove 10 or 15 or 20% of it and I give it to charity, you know what just happened? It's not just that I took 10% of my earnings and dedicated it to charity. I have actually transformed all of my earnings. Because when I take my earnings and I give 10 or 20% of it to charity, I'm basically saying these earnings are holy. They're godly. And I'm going to give the required amount that God wants. And when I take that tenth or that 20% of the pie and give it to God, I am elevating the entire pie. And the Tanya says at this point, all of the money that you're making is elevated. All of the work that you've invested into making this money is all elevated. All of the effort, think of all the details that go into making a living, whether it's the searching for the job, the driving every day to my job, the, trying to get the job, everything that I do in my life that's surrounding my livelihood, which is typically a very big part of our life. All of that has now been elevated, and all of that is now holy in the same way as studying Torah. Meaning that if I am committed to giving the required amount of my earnings to charity, then when I go to work and I sit in the office in front of a computer or whatever it is that I'm doing for my work, it's as if I'm hugging God during that time too. Because now my work is holy. And every element of my work is a connection to God. And that's why, in many ways, charity even outweighs Torah study. If I'm looking for a way to truly hug God, yes, I study Torah and I can hug God by studying Torah. I can study Torah by dedicating my, 10 to 20% to give to charity. And in that way, my entire livelihood becomes elevated. That's why it's interesting that many times people came to the Lubavitcher Rebbe to ask for blessings in their business, in their work, whether it was financially or other success. And the Rebbe always asked them, do you have a charity box in your office? Like, make charity part of your work. Because when charity becomes part of your work, all of your work is on a whole different level. All of your work is now holy and elevated. Thoughts or questions before we read that inside? Yes, Lorraine.
So we had also talked last time about the notion of action and charity, not just as giving money, but giving acts to elevate others. And I'm just wondering if you could speak to what the Tanya says about that, because I know that we talked about, that Judaism, we're not the Buddhist monks that go and sit on top of the mountain and we study all day. So, like, while I think it's important to study and to know all these books and when you say Torah, it's like it's a lot. It's not just the five books of Moses. It's like you can do any of it. Um, so yes, that's important, but I thought that action was even more important and not just the giving of money. So I'm wondering if you could talk about that.
So you have to stick around for next chapter because next chapter we're talking is going to shift focus very much to action being the main thing. Next chapter, now as we conclude the section on joy, next chapter goes into purpose and what is my purpose in this world and what is the purpose of all my effort, and that's when it really hones in on action being the main thing. What we're in now, just so we understand the context of why we're talking about things in this way, is we're still in the context of joy. How do I bring joy into my life? And so the Tanya was saying you can bring joy into your life when you feel godly presence in your life. How do you feel godly presence in your life? How do you engage in a romantic relationship with God? So, yes, there's action being the main thing. It's so important to do all these amazing things for the person that I'm in love with. But if I just want to experience romance, how do I experience the romance? You want to know how to experience the romance? In temple times, you walked into the temple. That's how you experience romance. When there's no temple, you want to experience romance? Spend a few minutes studying Torah. If you're not able to, or even if you are spending a few minutes studying Torah, another way that you could experience romance is dedicate 10 to 20% of your earnings to charity. That's another way that you can experience romance while you're also earning a living. When we start talking about purpose, yes, next chapter we're going to start talking about, the tremendous importance of action. But here it's specifically within the context of how do I bring that godly romance into my life? How do I touch divinity in that way? Does that explain it? Awesome. Yes, Sarah.
Okay. I thought I was with you, and then my brain spiraled, and now I'm getting ahead of myself. So philosophically speaking, theoretically speaking, I understood how to get close to God, study Torah, great. And now we have a real, I'll say, example of charity. And maybe I'm trying to apply too many things at once, but I'm going through the, I'll say, stages of Chachma, Bina, and Dat, and I'm trying to understand how to sort of from stage one to stage two to stage three, how do I incorporate the giving of charity that this produces the joy, my joy and God's joy sort of simultaneously. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
How what I think I'm missing is okay, so we've got the chokhmah first, the wisdom. Okay, yes, there's this thing called charity that, I've got to figure out a way to incorporate. Okay. Um, it seems like how you can, I don't know, uh, define it or maybe make it more specific to this particular charity or that homeless person I see on the corner. Perhaps that's the
So
Bina?
if I'm understanding correctly, what you're saying is practically speaking, I get it. I have to give charity. That's something I'm
Yeah.
working on, but how does that give me joy?
Well, no, I'm saying I'm going through these stages of honing in on the action because again, this is the first example. So how do I incorporate these three stages that thus it produces the joy?
So let me know if this answers your question. There's a section in Ethics of Our Fathers that talks about different ways of giving or not giving charity. And it says,
Mhm.
there's the one who says what's yours is mine and what's mine is mine. There's the one that says what's mine is mine, what's yours is yours. There's the one that says what's mine is yours, and the kind of like the punchline, the highlight, the hero of this verse says it says what's mine is yours and what's yours is yours. And this, the Mishnah says that's a chassid. That's um, a really pious, the ultimate in kindness. So actually, the Lubavitch Rebbe asks, okay, let's take us, it all sounds nice and flowery, but isn't this guy a fool? What do you mean? What's mine is yours, what's yours is yours. How am I supposed to live? Like you can't be, how could you be that kind of kind person that just gives away everything? You're not gonna be able to survive. And the Rebbe says, you have to realize it doesn't say he gives. It says Omer. He says what's mine is yours and what's yours is yours. Meaning that the Mishnah is not highlighting that you need to give away everything you have. But it's a way of looking at the world. The way this person views the world when he receives his paycheck or his earnings, he doesn't see it as, I got this amount of money, and now, how much of this do I need to give to God? Let me work on giving my 10%, my 15%, my 20%. Instead, he sees all of his earnings as this is all godly. God just handed me a tray of brownies. I wish I could hand all of it back. I would love to just give it all to God. But God says that I need to take care of my family and I need to give a certain amount to charity. So I'm going to divide and I'm going to take my 10 to 20% and give that to charity and my 80, 90% and take that for myself. But the approach is very much a God-centered approach. And I think that that's what the trick here is. It's not so much about the fact that I went later and I gave the charity, but it's when I approach my job, when I approach my livelihood, I approach it from the perspective of this is all God and it's all God's. And now let me see on a practical level, how can I, how much do I take and how much do I leave over? The example that I like to give is when you're sitting at a party and someone hands you a tray of brownies, none of us would ever think of plunking the tray of brownies in front of us and eating it and waiting for the person next to us to say, excuse me, can you pass some brownies? Like, oh yeah, sure, I'll be nice today. Let me pass you a few brownies. I know that when someone hands me the tray of brownies at the party, the idea is these are the brownies for the party. Let me see how much I will take for myself. I'll take a piece. Maybe I'll take two pieces if I, really like these brownies. And then I move the tray on. It doesn't even occur to me to keep the brownies for myself. This is, one of the most mistranslated words in Judaism is the word tzedakah. We translate tzedakah as charity. And charity gives that impression that if I'm a nice and charitable person, the kind thing to do is to take some of my money and give it to someone else. But the real root word of the word tzedakah is tzedek, it's
Tzedek.
justice. Judaism doesn't say, in Judaism, giving tzedakah is not a kind thing to do. It's the just thing to do. When God gives me, $1,000 a month through my paycheck, it actually isn't all mine. The 10% of it is definitely not mine. So by giving 10% to charity, it's not, oh, I'm such a good person, I'm giving my 10%. It actually doesn't even belong to me. This 10% is like all the brownies on the cake. So when I approach my job and I approach my livelihood in this way, so you're talking about, how does this bring God into my life? I look at the world through this godly lens and a lens of everything is God and everything is coming from God. Like that guy who came to the Aron HaKodesh in the shul and like this challah, oh, it's definitely from God. When I get the paycheck, when I get the deposit in my bank, it's thank you, God. God just handed this to me, and now I need to separate the part because He didn't expect me to keep all of it. He gave it to me so that I can take some of it for myself and some of it pass on. And I think that it's when we adopt that kind of mindset that I start looking at it as it's not mine that I'm giving away, but it's godly money that He's giving me to hold on to and to manage. It's like God's trusting me with this money and trusting that I'm going to pass on the part that He expects me to pass on to others. That allows me to feel close to God in my life. Now, it also happens to be that with the specifically actually with the mitzvah of maser, of tithing, of taking the 10%, our sages tell us that in general, in Judaism, it's looked down upon to kind of like test God. Say, oh God, all right, I'm going to keep Shabbat now for the next 3 weeks. Let's see if you'll be kind to me. God, you be good to me and it's not generally the Jewish approach. Like we do the right thing because this is what God wants us to do. Our sages tell us that one of the few places that we're actually allowed to test God is with maser, is with tithing. And they tell and the sages say the word maaser, which is the word for a tenth or tithing, is the same. If you flip around the letters, it's also the same root word of the word osher, which is riches. And they say ta'aser bishvil shetit asher. You will tithe so that you will gain more riches. And with this, our sages tell us you're allowed to test God and see, let me see what happens if I am careful about tithing my income on a regular basis. Let me see if my income will grow. And God says, test me and you will see that it's true because I'll always pull through on that one, which is, as a side thing, that's, fascinating. But in the context of this chapter, the Tanya tells us by looking at my earnings differently, I can start feeling a tremendous closeness to God because I'll feel like that guy that every time the money comes to my bank account, I'm going to feel like that person who opens up the Holy Ark and God just gave me challah for Shabbat. If I can internalize that feeling and I really can, focus enough to feel like it's all like the work I'm doing is godly work and the money I'm getting is godly money and the money I'm giving is godly money that I'm passing on, I'll really be able to feel that tremendous hug and presence of God in my life. And that gives tremendous joy.
Okay, so just so I understand,
Yeah.
the chachma is I got your example, $1,000, and that came from God. Now to develop it further, the bina, the understanding is cool. Now I have to take 10% or 15 or 20, whatever. And so that $100, that's the expanding on the idea. That's the bina part.
Okay.
I'm,
I
I'm
would
I don't know. I'm guessing.
Okay. So the if you're looking at it that way, I would say the bina is, developing this idea, realizing that the money that God gives me is not all mine. He's giving for me to keep some and to pass some on. That's the bina.
Okay.
I expand on that. And the dot is where I meditate on it enough that it becomes real to me. So that when I, when I my income changes at the end of the month, I don't say, "Oh man, I hate my boss," or "Oh my, I love my boss." I say, "Thank you, God. You gave me more this month." But I,
Okay, so
I
this
only
is
start feeling that when I really meditate on this and I make the concept real to me.
yes. This feels like what's the word? You can repeat this with other. The reason why I'm going so intense on this is because it feels like a recipe that you can put to anything, not just tithing or charity or whatever. It feels like this is the process that can be replicated with literally any and all mitzvot,
A hundred
right?
percent, a
Okay,
hundred percent, definitely
that's all I was
true.
asking.
The reason the Tanya does repeat the charity numerous times is because at the end of the day, the average person invests a huge percentage of their just life efforts on earning a living. I mean, think about it. The average kid, from when they're deciding which college to go to, right? So we're talking about from when you're a teenager and you're thinking for some it's even earlier because I'm going to go to a certain high school and take certain courses so I could get into a certain college. But even if I'm starting at 17, when I'm just choosing which college to go to, and all the money and the effort that I'm investing in being at that particular college and earning that degree and sometimes even an additional degree and more degrees after that, think of the amount. And then perhaps I'm going for training or for residency or for apprenticeship or whatever else, all of the years in preparation for getting the job that we want. And then when I have the job that I want, how many people move to be closer to their job, make life choices based on their job? I will have childcare. I won't have childcare. I'm going to live this kind of lifestyle and that kind of lifestyle. I will go on vacation. I won't go on vacation. I will, work overtime. Not so many details of our life are invested into this one thing. And what's that one thing? Earning a living. So for some people, it takes up more brain space and they're working, 70-hour weeks and, not seeing their family and not necessarily encouraging that or recommending that. But for some people, it's that. And even for the person who works an average work week, the amount of details in our life that are invested and the amount of thought and years and energy and money that we invest in earning a living is huge. So when I take 10%, I'm elevating all of it. I'm taking such a big piece of my life and making all of that godly. We'll read it inside, but one of the things that Tanya says is one of the ideas behind sacrifices, when a person would bring a sacrifice in the temple, they would typically bring an animal sacrifice together with incense, which is a representation of the plant kingdom. So there was a representation of the animal kingdom, representation of the plant kingdom, and all sacrifices were also brought with salt. Salt is a representation of the inanimate kingdom. When a
Yep,
person
totally.
brought a sacrifice like that on the temple, they weren't just elevating the sacrifice, they were actually elevating the animal kingdom, the plant kingdom, and the inanimate, the kingdom of domem. They were literally elevating all of creation in the service of God. Similarly, when I take, I you don't see it so much with other mitzvahs as much as you see it with charity. When I take a percentage of, and that's why the percentage makes a difference, because when I take 10%, it's 10% of 100. So when I do something with a 10%, I am really affecting the full 100. Even the 90% or the 80% that I'm keeping is part of this mitzvah that I'm doing. So that's why I think the Tanya spends so much effort and energy emphasizing this idea of charity, that charity really, it just has such tremendous power to like bring blessings into our lives and bring holiness into our lives and really elevate our lives in so many ways. I mean, how many stories do we have about charity saving people? Literally saving people. There's a famous story of the daughter of Rabbi Akiva, um, who, when she was a young girl, Rabbi Akiva met some stargazers, and the stargazers told him, "We see that your daughter," I think he was walking with his daughter in the market, and the stargazers told him, "We see that in the stars that your daughter is going to die on the day of her wedding." He heard, he knew that there's some truth to it, but he also knew that as Jewish people, we have the ability to transcend our mazal, to transcend what the stars tell about us by connecting ourselves to God. And he really emphasized the idea of charity with his daughter, and he really raised her to really see God as part of her life and to see charity as a very big part of her life. Anyway, the day after her wedding, she came over to her parents' house, and her father looks at her and says, "Are you okay?" She says, "Yeah, I'm okay." Why are you asking? He's like, "Well, I need to understand. Tell me what happened yesterday. Tell me everything that happened yesterday on the day of the wedding." And she told him in detail everything that happened and how she spent her day. And it turned out that at the wedding, at some point during the meal, a pauper walked into the hall. And it was actually customary in those days to have a table at Jewish weddings for poor people, so that the poor people of the town could always know they could come to a Jewish wedding and eat something. And she sees a poor man walking into the hall, and all the food on the poor people's table was already gone. So Rabbi Akiva's daughter, who was the bride, she took her own plate of food, and she came over to the poor man, and she handed him a plate of food, and she, made space for him at the bridal table and had him sit down to eat. And her father said to her, that must have saved you. Let's go see what's going on in your house, in your apartment. They went to the apartment, the place that they were staying. And in those days, the women would put their pins or their brooches, they would stick it into the wall because they didn't have sheetrock the way we have now. And that was kind of, people would stick their pins in. And the big pin that was holding up her hair at her wedding, she had stuck it into the wall the night before, and it was still there over the bed. Either she or her father pulled the pin out of the wall, and they saw a dead snake come out with the pin. Meaning, when she had stuck the pin into the wall, the sharp end of the pin had in that moment killed a snake that was right there in the wall. Now, it's hard to imagine with our modern houses today, but apparently in those days that was a common thing. And if there was a snake in the wall, the snake also can come out. So what the stargazers had seen was true. She was destined to die on the day or on the night of her wedding. Her father told her, because of the charity that you did, you were saved. Because when we give charity, we open ourselves up to an insane amount of blessings. We like connect ourselves. It's like giving God a hug, a major hug. So It's something that Jews have always known throughout time. We know we're in a difficult time. We give charity when we're praying for something, we really need something to happen. It's customary to give charity in the merit that, this particular thing should happen, or that this person should be saved, or someone should get better. Um, and specifically when the Torah says the mitzvah of charity is specifically giving money or giving food, like Lorraine said, not necessarily money, it could be food and it could be effort to people who are needy, whether physically or spiritually. So whether you're feeding hungry people or you're supporting a synagogue or an organization that teaches Torah and connects Jews to their Judaism, that's all in the category of charity. Giving money and supporting the crocodiles or, saving the animals is all good, kind things. It's not specifically in the mitzvah of tzedakah. Tzedakah specifically is helping other people who are less fortunate or who need assistance. I was gonna read, yeah, I think we still have 5 minutes. I think we could still, let's read at least some of it inside so that we get it all in. Let me see. Okay, so we were talking here about charity. So first, the Tanya had said, when you study Torah, it's like you're giving God a hug. That's a way to connect to God. Even during the remainder of the day, when he is engaged in business, he will be in abode for God by giving charity out of the proceeds of his labor. Charity is one of God's attributes, which we are enjoined to emulate. As our sages say, as he is compassionate, so must you be. And as it is written in Tikkun Zohar, kindness is the right arm of God, so to speak. And therefore, human kindness constitutes an abode for the divine attribute of kindness. Even though one distributes as charity no more than 1/5 of his earnings, the maximum requirement for charity, how then is he in abode for godliness while engaged in earning the other 4/5? You could say, if I'm only giving 10% or 20%, what about the 80 to 90% of my day or my week or my month that I'm working and that money I keep? Yet that fifth elevates with it all the other four parts to God so that they too become an abode for him. In a well-known statement, our sages have declared that the mitzvah of charity is equivalent to offering all the sacrifices. Now, in the case of sacrifices, all living creatures were elevated to God through offering one animal, all plants through the meal offering, which consisted of merely 1/10 of a measure of fine meal mixed with oil, and so on. Similarly, all of one's earnings are elevated when he gives 1/5 to charity. Apart from this, as explained below, all that one has eaten and drunk and generally enjoyed for his bodily health from the other 4/5 of his earnings is also elevated towards God during his Torah study and prayer. Thus, even the time spent earning the other profits that we're not distributing to charity, also those become a connection and an abode to God. So remember that we're saying all of this in the context of creating joy, right? And we're about to conclude this whole section on joy. We spend so much time saying you have to build joy. Joy is in the mind. You have to live a God-centered life. When God's at the focus, you don't feel that down. You can understand everything, and you can even handle things that you can understand, and you could deal with difficulty, both internal and external. Our goal is build joy, live a joyful life. And so at the very end of the section, the Tanya is going to answer an obvious question. Someone might say, okay, I am working so hard to build joy. Is there any room for sadness in life? Like, what if I'm also sad that something sad happened to me? What if I'm also sad that I'm struggling and I'm having a hard time? I'm working so hard to be joyful, but I'm feeling this tension. And the Tanya here ends with a very, very famous line, a very powerful line, where the Tanya basically says, give yourself permission to feel both. It's okay. Work really hard on building happiness. It's not a contradiction. You don't have to be either or. We're complex beings. Our life is complex. We're not black and white. Either I'm happy or I'm sad. I can be very happy about being close to God and very happy about bringing God into my life and, meditating on God and giving charity. And I can also have room for sadness, for frustration, and they don't have to contradict each other. Let me just read this inside. The Tanya uses words that seem a little bit harsh, but I think that as we we discuss them, you'll see it's not, not necessarily as harsh as it sounds. All the specific types of joy enumerated above do not preclude one from feeling shamed and despised in his own eyes, meaning frustrated at myself, or from having a broken heart or even a humble spirit at the very same time of his joy. For the shame and so on is prompted by one's awareness of lowliness of his body and animal soul, while the joy felt on account of his divine soul and the animating spark of God closed within it, as mentioned above. The Tanya is reminding us of really where the Tanya started with in chapter 1. You have two operating systems inside you. There's the godly soul and there's the natural soul or the animal soul. And when I utilize my godly soul, I can awaken love and happiness and real joy. The real joy is godly joy. It's joy not because of circumstances. It's joy because of my connection to God, because knowing that God's in my life and God directs my life. At the same time, I can also feel frustration. I still have my natural side to me. And when I look at my animal soul and I look at my human experience, I can have frustration. And it's okay. The two can coexist. As complex beings with two souls, we can have both at the same time. We don't have to give up on one because of the other. So, I feel like this is so relevant coming something that we just felt this week, at Hanukkah. I feel like, at least for me, my whole Hanukkah was like so clouded by, the tragedy that happened on the first night of Hanukkah in Australia. And it's like, how can we be joyous and celebrate Hanukkah when we have this horrible thing that happened? And like, I kept thinking about this line. It's like, we can have both tremendous sadness and, we're heartbroken over what happened, and we can still tap into the joy and the hope and the light that Hanukkah brings. They don't have to contradict each other. If anything, it's our duty to try to tap into both and not limit our lives to, one or the other. That concludes chapter 34. I'm happy to stay on. Questions, comments, thoughts? Yes, go ahead.
So that's a really interesting point. The both and instead of the either or. And I made a huge effort because I do overfeel. And so the first night was really, very difficult. And there was this joyous Maccabeats concert that had about 700 people sign up before Bondi Beach. They had over 900 people. They said that 200 more signed up that morning. And the place was packed like it was at Sheretz Israel. And like the rabbi was making jokes like this is the high holiday crowd, but it was true. And so even when we were so sad, and like today, because it was my last high book club of the year, so I wore my Hanukkah sweater and I wore Hanukkah stuff all 8 nights. Now, sometimes out in public, I don't know that I did all 8 nights last year. To me, it was imperative this year that I be wearing big Jewish stars. And like today, I'm being goofy just for my high residents. They liked my little Donald Duck with the latkes and stuff. Thank you, Sarah. I love you too. And I think, I remember when October 7th happened, and Deanie, you said, we need to be more Jewish. We need to be so out there Jewish. And we were so scared to be out there Jewish. And now we're like, no, no, we are not dimming our light for anyone. And today I wore this all day. And so today at the bank, I had 3 people say, oh, happy Hanukkah. I thought it was over. How long does it last? And I'm like, yeah, it was over. I'm just going to a party tonight, so I'm still wearing it. I went to the post office. Happy Hanukkah. I had 4 people tell me happy Hanukkah. I'm like, thank you so much for your support. That means so much. Random people. And I'm just running out there with my little dreidel earrings and like all my stuff. And I think it's so important. And it's like we've learned, sadly, how to just be even more out there with, with our light. So
100%. Well,
Yeah.
I want to just say one little detail that today was actually still Hanukkah, even though we didn't
Oh,
light
good.
candles, right? Today is the
Good.
last day of Hanukkah. Actually, there's tremendous spiritual significance to the last day of Hanukkah.
Oh,
It
yay.
also
So we
is
had a
given the
party.
name, it's given the name Zot Hanukkah. And there are a lot of Kabbalistic writings about this day. And one of the things that's said about this day, and I think even though it's already the night, I think with the night still connected to the day. So, we're still an extension of that. I think it was the Ruzhnitzer Rebbe maybe said this. It was a quote from him that he said that the power of Zot Chanukah is so powerful that what the greatest righteous people can accomplish on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. So what the holiest people can accomplish on the holiest day of the year, the average person can accomplish on the last day of Hanukkah, meaning that it has very strong, yeah, tremendous spiritual power, and we have to tap into it, and we tap into it, and we use the time well. And what better way to use our time at the very end of the last day of Hanukkah than to study some Tanya. But yeah, it's definitely still Hanukkah. And back to what you were saying, 100%, I agree with you. We need to add more light. We need to add more joy. But I think it's also powerful to remember that one doesn't have to replace the other. I mean, I can tell you when we went to our first night Hanukkah event on campus, I'm not going to say I wasn't scared. Like, I spent a lot of time with the police on the phone that day, the campus police, talking again about where are your people going to be and what happens if we have an emergency and what can we do and can we have, people carry and like it's a real thought. It's like this huge responsibility. Somebody just did exactly this same thing and people died. Like I can't pretend that we're not afraid, but we're not going to let that fear stop us. Even at City Line, I mean, Shmuley and I were looking at each other. We're at City Line Plaza. We're like looking up at those, all these tall buildings. We're like, we're right here, surrounded by these, very tall buildings. We can have hundreds of people up there looking at us from different places in the building. We have no idea that they're there. We really need God to protect us and to, take care of us. And it's a frightening thought. And yet, we could have both. We could be scared, we could be sad, we could be mourning, and at the same time, we could experience joy, and we should experience joy. And may the time come very soon that we will have none of this fear and sadness anymore, and we have only joy. Harriet, you want to share something?
Yeah, the event at UTD, talking with people, I know there weren't a lot of students there, but there were people in the community who have not been at other Chabad of Richardson events and said they came out in support. And I know for me, it was so healing to have that um, event
Right, right. I
to
agree with
to
you.
come out and
A lot of
listening
people
to
came and they're like, we just need to be here. This is just where we need to be.
listening to interviews and podcasts about people saying, asking news reporters and about vengeance and revenge and just learning over and over so much about um, Jewish, how we are as Jews in terms of bringing light and Torah into the world. I mean, it's like knowing it, but because of what happened in Australia, it was just so powerful. Podcast after podcast, interview after interview. Um,
Yeah, it was incredible. What I it hit me also when unfortunately on Saturday, meaning here Saturday night, there was also a campus shooting, right? And so both of these stories kind of were breaking at the same time on Sunday morning. And I remember, skimming headlines And I'm looking at headlines of, all the headlines after the Sydney attack was, like you said, more light, more light, more joy, more joy. We've got this. Jews will go out and celebrate. And then I see headlines from the campus shooting, which it was horrible. I don't even know the details. I almost didn't have time to think about it because we were so focused on this Sydney attack. But it definitely jumped out at me when I saw headlines that said, so and so is interviewed. She says, I am fuming mad after this attack. I am so angry after this thing. And she's justified. Not to say that, again, nothing, I didn't even read the whole article. I don't even know who this person was. And clearly they had real reason to feel angry and to feel mad. But it was such a stark contrast where you see, just an average person experiencing a terrible experience, and it was like angry, mad, and then the Jewish nation experiencing a horrible experience, yet another blow after so many that we've had in the recent months and years, and everyone's saying more joy, more light, more joy. It was very interesting to see that.
Yeah, I don't know if you saw, but well, I posted the whole Maccabee thing because I thought, and they were all Jewish songs. It was just so joyful and so
So
upbeat. And
beautiful.
there was a moment when one of their singers couldn't, he was saying something and he lost it. And I mean, in an instant, 900 people were crying with him. So it was like we went just like what you're saying, like from joy, and we're singing these little songs and we're having a great time, and people are clapping. And then he got really emotional, and I do not believe that it was staged, but one of the guys started singing that song, "Gotta keep your head up, hey," like that, and the whole 900 people are singing. And then from there, he said, "We got one more to get us back," and it was "Someday." 900 people are singing "Someday." And I'm like, oh my God, we are amazing. Like, I am so proud to be a Jew. And so it's exactly what you're saying. We are different. We're wired differently. And, um, they asked, and I asked too, for people, even if you're not Jewish, to light a candle this week, every day for the next 8 days, light a candle in solidarity with us, be an ally. And the most beautiful thing was the Australian news team that their whole website was flooded with non-Jews lighting little candles and putting them in their window. And
And
the
the
one,
and the government of Australia or Sydney started a mitzvah campaign for
yes, I
people
mean,
to
it was
do
just,
mitzvahs.
yes, it was so beautiful.
Yeah,
Anyway, it
yeah. And what I think
there's a
is so
lot to be
beautiful about
proud
the
of.
last lines of this chapter is I mean, I could definitely say this for myself. Sometimes there's a little bit of guilt that we feel like, how am I celebrating joy right now when I'm supposed to be sad? Like this is a sad time. Like I should feel maybe it's the right thing to do, but I feel guilty. Like it just feels wrong. How am I smiling and joyous when I'm supposed to feel sad? And the Tanya says, no, give yourself permission to have both. You can experience sadness and happiness. Our heart is wide enough for both. They each have their purpose and their reason. And, you have to make sure you don't get stuck in it and be real. Give yourself permission to be a real feeling person. And don't let the sadness be a contradiction to connecting to God and experiencing real joy. Anyway, that's a great note to end on.
Great,
Yes,
great
Harriet.
class. Thank you. Oh, sorry.
I
Thank
just,
you, Dani.
I just, I read something. Barbara Streisand, one of us, received some kind of lifetime achievement award. I don't know if any of you
I
saw
saw
this.
it. It was
And when
great.
and when she went up to make the speech, instead of the usual mundane speech about thanking Hollywood and yada yada, she, in this room full of billionaires and people at the top, she challenged them to give money and not just sit there on their millions. And that she said, we're here with diamonds and with money, and all of us have more money than what we can use. Give it away, and use your voice, use your power to help those who need help and
That's
are
beautiful.
struggling in this society. I mean, it was so incredible. It was also
That's so,
heartwarming.
that reminds me of a great story. I know we said we're going to end. There's a great story about, I probably said it before because I really like this one. Um, an old Hasidic man who came from Eastern Europe to the US, and he was a merchant of some sort. He got into business, and his business really took him all around the US, places that, had not seen a bearded Hasidic man before. So it was kind of new to them, and it was new to him. He was very fascinated by this American culture. And he described that one like Midwestern town that he went to while he was there, one of the people had a fire on their property. And you have to realize this is like in the, I don't know, in maybe in the 50s or the 60s. I'm not sure exactly when. And one of the townsmen had a fire and everything he had, burned to the ground. And he noticed that all of the other, residents of the town, they all lined up in this, like, and they came in this big circle around the man, and they all came to express their condolences to him. And one by one, they each say, "I'm so sorry for your loss. I'm so sorry for your loss. Peace to you. This is terrible." He's like looking at this, it's just not sitting well with him. He's like this Jewish man from Europe, where it's like, it's focused on getting things done and not just expressing these, you know, fancy words of condolence. So he steps forward and he says, he also had a very broken English, and he says, "I am sorry, $20. How much are you sorry?" And he basically went around and he made every person who was saying, "I'm so sorry," and "How much are you going to give to help the guy, rebuild?" So it was like there's a lot of like nice things being said, but like Lorraine likes to remind us, action is the main thing. Put your money where your mouth is and get it done. So that sounds beautiful. Have a
Thank you
wonderful
for
week,
today, Dean.
everybody. Thank you, and thank you
Thank
everyone who
you.
chimed
Great
in
class. Thank you,
and was
Dean.
Thank
so
you.
Thank
interesting.
you.
Have a good night.
Good
Good
night.
night.